Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. Today's session, we're going to talk about IoT and OT and relating it to the Death Star, just for fun. But in addition to that, before we get started, I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, in the interface, there's a chat where you can put in some questions and we can try and get to those today. And if you're watching this recorded, you can go to our blog at learnsecurity.org and fill in the contact information and send us your comments and questions there, and we'll try to get back to you. So today we're going to talk about the IoT, OT, and the Death Star, I like to call it. And one second, my interface is not working. Hold on, technical difficulties. There we go, got it back. So, and sometimes people ask, what is it about IoT or OT that we need to really worry about? And I like to relate it to Star Wars. If you remember in A New Hope, they have the Death Star out there. It's this big, huge, impenetrable space station that there's no way to destroy it, except for there's this one thermal exhaust port, right? So there's one little tiny weakness, and that one little tiny weakness is how it got destroyed. In real life, we have that same issue in our networks. We do a lot of work trying to make sure that the IT is locked down as much as we possibly can. However, where are those little holes that we have, and where do we need to, kind of patch things up? I think there was if you follow any of the other shows like Robot Chicken, I think on one of the episodes they're talking about the Death Star and they're like, oh, did you take care of it? Yeah, we put some plywood up over the hole. But I think IoT and OT are going to need a little bit more than just some plywood. But anyways, so first things first, we got to start talking about some terminology and make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to terminology. And we kind of put things into buckets when it comes to technology. When we say information technology, we're typically talking about computers and servers, and oftentimes phones gets included into that, and it's kind of been sprawling because now, we're talking about security systems and camera systems, and they're still, in printers, they're all part of IT, or information technology. OT has traditionally been, the plants and the factory floors and the automation that's around that. Long time ago, when I was getting into technology, I was fortunate enough to go to a robotics lab in Fremont and actually see their assembly line where robots were building robot arms, which is kind of neat. So robot arms were building robot arms so that they could go to another factory and build other robots or other products. When you think about that, or you think about a refinery, or you think about a power plant or a water treatment plant, that's typically operational technology when we're talking about it. When we talk about IoT, we're really just talking about devices that are connected. We call it Internet of Things. Typically, these devices have the ability to get to the internet because they're connected. But it seems to have taken on a broader context. When you talk to people, oftentimes they'll talk about IoT as being anything other than IT, which is one way to look at it, but typically when some people say IoT, they're really just talking about consumer electronics that are connecting. However, we talk about IoT in the business, and we talk about everything that's not in the traditional IT realm. One of the characteristics is with these buckets of technology that we have is we sometimes treat them differently. So IT, we do patch management, we have antivirus that we install onto it, we have control on how that computer runs. Operational technology, a little bit different. Updates don't come as often, but we do try to update them. Typically there's no antivirus for some of the elements of it. And then we get to IoT, we treat it like it's a black box. It's this thing the vendor gave us and we just use it and we pretend like there's no operating system in it and there's no controls to it. So when we talk about IoT, sometimes we treat it like it's a black box. Now, other types of terminology you might come into, industrial control systems, and again, that gets back to the factory floor and the refineries and the plant management. So all of that kind of fits under OT. Some people call it industrial automation and control systems. That's just another term for kind of the same thing. And you may also hear things like SCADA, DCS, PLC, and there's a society, the International Society of Automation, that kind of helps with guidelines and codes of practice and standards for operational technology. And we'll talk a little bit that in part 2. So this first session that we're going to do, and we'll do another session first week of May, this first one here, we're going to just address the terms and the problem. So what is the problem, and what are some of the things that we're seeing with IoT, so that you can get a good idea of why it's a problem. And if you don't think it's a problem, hopefully this will help you change your mind on that. And then in the second session that we'll do next time, we're going to focus in on what the solution is. What can you do about it, and what else? What resources are available for you? What are the codes of practice and standards that are available? So we'll go over all of those items as well. So I wanted to talk to you about the fact that we have billions of connected devices. I want you to think about this. Think about your own home. How many connected devices do you have in your home? And if you think you only have 5 or 6, you should really stop and think about all the devices that you have in your home that connect. Sometimes they don't connect directly to the internet. Sometimes they connect to your phone only via Bluetooth, like a Bluetooth speaker. Or in my instance, I have a sous vide cooker, and it connects to my phone. I didn't get the fancy one that goes to the internet so I can control it from work, but I do have the ability to control it when I'm in my house from my phone. The question is, if my phone got hacked, does it have the ability to then hack one of those devices, or get into one of those devices and then use that to hack into other areas within my home? So when you talk about IoT devices, people oftentimes think of cell phones and tablets and game consoles, but now we have all these appliances that now have the ability to connect to the internet. My washer and dryer now has the ability to download different, wash cycles from the internet. We have thermostats that now control, the temperature control in your house. People are wearing wearable tech, like watches and other types of things like that, and toys. And not just kid toys, adult toys too. Anyways, so there's all these other connected devices. They have medical monitoring stuff. If you have diabetes, you may have a sensor that you can connect to your phone that can then update your phone with what your blood sugar levels are. They have blood pressure monitors that can then connect to your phone and update stuff. We all know these devices because they're around our house. We're used to the things like the TVs and DVD players, but my stereo receiver even connects to the internet. It has an IP address, and it can connect via Bluetooth, and I can play music from my phone onto it. We have digital cameras like my Nikon that I go out and take pictures with. It has Bluetooth and wireless. In addition to that, I have security cameras in my house. So if you look at all these things, you have all these things that connect. Then even outside of your house, think about your car, right? Your cars are just basically a driving computer these days. Not only that, on my car in particular, I have the ability, because I have little halo lights that I have on the headlights, my headlights are Bluetooth enabled. So my car is, a computer rolling one, and then my headlights actually have a connection as well. So we're finding out that there's all these connections, and when you say billions of devices, it kind of makes sense. Because for 2 people living in my house, all the connected devices we have, it's 10 times more than the number of people that I have in the house. So if we're thinking about billions of, and this is just what I'm talking about right now, is more the IoT traditional connected devices on the consumer side. But what about on the business side, right? So you have things like building automation and plant automation. You have robots. Of course, you have robots at home too, like the Roomba vacuum cleaner robot and stuff like that. But you have those also in factory floors. You have sensors for all kinds of things. We have things from satellites and drones that are also like mobile computers. We have conference room control panels. We have security cameras. We have the building access controls. If you're in a city, we're talking about smart cities and street lights and all those other things that are now connected. We have security systems that are connected with the alarm systems and the fire systems and all that. In addition to the normal phones and printers, TVs and projectors and all that that may also be in a building. So we have all kinds of devices now that are connected at work and at home. And because we have all these devices connected, we need to really stop and think, why is it so important for us to make sure that we have patch management, change control, antivirus, and all this stuff on our computers, but all these other computers and devices we just treat completely different? And I think one of the reasons why we do that is because the manufacturers kind of they're slowly getting in there. The manufacturers of IoT and OT devices, OT is probably a little bit more mature, but IT still being far more mature and now than OT is, and OT is way more mature than IoT is. The consumer electronics. The consumer electronics, we just want to buy the cheapest Bluetooth speaker. We don't really think, oh, I should really spend more to get the Bluetooth speaker that's going to be more secure. We don't think about that as consumers when we buy it. We're very price conscious when we did it. And because of that, we're part of the problem, right? Because then the manufacturer has no incentive to really produce a product that can be updated or is secure in the first place. And I'm not saying that we need to have antivirus in all these devices, because some of them can't do it. They don't have the computational power, but we do need to figure out how to lock them down. And some ways of locking them down may not be necessarily what the manufacturer can do, but what we can do to our networks. And we'll talk about that next time, because there's a number of solutions out there that we can look at. I love some of these quotes that you can see online, but more and more of these IoT devices are getting into our lives, and it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better. More and more things are being able to be connected, and I don't see any of that changing. In fact, I think it's going to become more robust. Not only is your refrigerator going to keep track of what's in the fridge, but it may do other things like monitor spoilage and with sensors, and there's other things that there's possibilities out there for these devices to do. But the more connected we become, whether it's our nation, cities, or neighborhoods and homes, the more vulnerable we're going to become unless we start to address these issues. And that's what one of these reports talks about. You know, they're talking about the IoT doomsday. I don't think it's quite that bad, but it's not great either, right? So it's something that needs to be addressed and something that we need to work on going forward. And we can see that there's a growing risk. There's plenty of reports. I'm showing you just a couple reports. This report's saying, hey, you know, the risks of smart homes. And if you think about all the things in your homes that are connected, that are in there that could possibly be compromised, and what could possibly be done with those things once they're compromised. That's an interesting thing. If you think about it, you know, it just came out the other day that actual Amazon employees listen to conversations that Alexa records. Now, the reason why they're doing it is to make sure that Alexa is properly understanding the conversation. So it's kind of a necessary thing in order for the technology, the AI, to get better in the future. The problem is, where's the privacy there? What kinds of conversations do you have when you think you're alone? You know, between you and your spouse, or between you and somebody else, right? You think about that, and Alexa's listening the whole time, or your cell phone's listening the whole entire time. So what are you going to do about those types of things, right? So that's some of the stuff we have to deal with, is this privacy issue, which isn't even it sort of is a security issue, but it's sort of not the traditional cybersecurity issue, because it's more of a eavesdropping thing, and it's more, I don't want to say it's harmless, because you feel violated because someone's violated your thing. Amazon has good reasons, but they may want to let people know. And I think there still needs to be some type of notification to users that Alexa's listening and that someone may be listening to it, right? The fact that it comes out after the fact, oh yeah, by the way, some of our employees may be listening to it, that's kind of inappropriate. Amazon really should have said that something up front. They should have like an audible tone or a light that comes on the device that tells you that Alexa's listening to what you're talking about. Anyways, the CPO of Sophos said, we're seeing that despite the defense that we put out, the attackers are being more successful than we'd like to see. In other words, the attackers, even though we're trying to defend against them, continue to be much more successful than we're expecting them to be. So it means that we're not really winning this idea. So what do we have? We have like laws that are starting to be developed, and most organizations, this is really interesting thing, they did a survey on people. Most consumers, like 90% of consumers, feel that IoT is not secure enough and we need to have regulations for it. Which is interesting that 90% of them feel that way, and yet they go out and still buy the products, right? So that tells you something about this issue and what we probably need to do to address it. And that consumers are the key side of it. But if consumers don't buy the more expensive items, then manufacturers are not going to have the incentive to correct the problem. And that's where legislation coming in should help. Problem with some of the legislation we have is California passed a bill and says you have to have reasonable cybersecurity on your IoT devices. That's a great statement, but then right after that it says reasonable security things is making sure all the passwords aren't the same. So if you just change the password, that's considered reasonable, and I don't think that that is reasonable. So sometimes legislatures they're trying to legislate something they don't understand, and they just know that passwords were a problem because every default application had the same passwords. So if we just change that, it's going to fix the problem. That's only one of the issues, right? There's more problems behind that. In the Darktrace report for this year, the threat year report, they said IoT devices often designed with unintegrated basic security controls are routinely targeted by threat actors and used as stepping stones into a network. So what we're seeing is that because it's the low-hanging fruit, it's the easy thing that hackers can hack into because there's basically no controls around it. Once they hack into that, now they're inside of a network. Now they can try and move into other areas, maybe break other IoT devices, and then maybe launch attacks against other devices within an organization. So that's what the things they're seeing. The American Water Works Association also said that cyber risks are the #1 threat facing business and critical infrastructure in the United States. And they're dealing mostly with water treatment and water plants, but they recognize that this is the #1, not IoT necessarily, but cyber risk. And most of the stuff that water plants is going to have that are going to be at risk in critical infrastructure is going to be IoT or OT devices that need to be addressed. So I want to take you down memory lane. What I want to do is kind of talk to you about IoT and OT devices and some of the hacking that's happened over the years, so that you can see that this is not new. We can go back to 1997. We're talking more than 20 years ago, where hackers hacked into phone equipment. Not the traditional computers, but hacking into the phone equipment, and they were able to actually take down air traffic control. This becomes, it's the typical 80s movie hacker, some kid hacks into the phone system, kind of like war games, right? Hacks into the phone system and then is able to bring down the system, and brings down, in addition to that, the items that depend upon it, which was air traffic control. This is a good example, and this type of hack may seem like at the time maybe, oh, that was just a kid just playing around, but you have planes in the sky with people flying on them, right? So there's a life safety issue here that a device, a dumb device, or what we would call not a smart device back then, but a device that is not necessarily a computer, was able to bring down something as critical to life safety as air traffic control. So this is one of those examples of early on where we started to see the problem. And of course, we do our knee-jerk reaction to that, and we say, okay, we need to change how we do air traffic control. Instead of saying, okay, why did somebody break, how do we stop, at that point in time, how do we stop all these other devices that are starting to be connected so that they don't become an issue? Here's another great one. I love this one. This guy has hacked a sewage plant because he applied for a job. It's in Australia. So he applied for a job down there, and they don't give him the job. So he says, you know what? I'm going to get back at them. So he hacks into their system, into their OT system, and then is able to release 250,000 gallons of raw sewage into the rivers. Because he didn't get a job, he hacked their insecure OT devices. Again, this is another example, and I'm assuming that the guy is not like a normal, regular hacker. I mean, he was applying for a job. Normal person decides he wants to have revenge. Maybe he was a professional hacker. I don't know what his skill level was, but it's a little scary that, and again, this becomes a health issue, right? You get 250,000 gallons of raw sewage into a river that people are fishing in and all that other stuff. That's bad news. So again, and this is, almost 20 years ago. Again, big incident that happened. Life safety was also an issue there. And you'll see with some of these that there's a lot of them that are life safety. 2003, nuclear power plant, someone was able to disable the safety monitoring system for almost 5 hours. Again, if you have a power plant and you can't monitor the safety, that might be a big issue, right? Luckily, there was no problems related to that. But again, this is another one of those you call a near miss. Near miss in the sense that no lives were lost in this, right? That was what missed. But the fact is they did hack into it and they were able to bring the system down. And you remember the power grid going out on the eastern seaboard. That's another good example of that. And then in 2010, remember our first cyber weapon was actually attacking, the SCADA systems for Iran, for their nuclear centrifuges. And so this is a first example of where a malicious computer worm was designed specifically to attack IoT OT devices to actually cause harm to those devices, to destroy those devices and prevent them from continuing on. So this is an actual one that was, this is a nation state sponsored one, obviously. I don't know that America and Israel have copped to it, but a lot of people believe that they're the ones who did it. But it was extremely sophisticated. And we have now seen that other nation states are saying, okay, well, if they're going to do it, we can do it. So it's only going to get worse, because if nation states are doing it, they have the money, the expertise, and the skill sets to put more people behind it to actually make it so that they can successfully carry out attacks. And we know that other nation states are looking at doing us. There was a gas line that was done in 1999. There was a PLC failure in 2006. There's a Zadab worm in 2005, Shamoon, and then there's an updated Shamoon that were done in 2012. There was a German steel mill in 2014 that was attacked. There was a train signaling system in 2003, brought down all the train signals. I think it was in the eastern seaboard. There was the Northeastern power outage in 2003 we talked about, or I already mentioned there. And then someone was able to break into a dam, and it failed. So we have some good examples of those things happening where people are able to hack into the OT side of things and potentially put lives at risk. This is why it's so important. This is why we call those things now critical infrastructure, right? So dam control system, kind of critical infrastructure, because if something fails in the dam, the spillway doesn't spill or doesn't relieve pressure off, something can happen to the dam and take out people down the river. Power grid goes out, then a lot of people are out without power, without food, without electricity. So these all things are things that could affect the livelihood, and that's why often they're called critical infrastructure. And the government has been putting a lot of effort in recent years into trying to shore up the faults of critical infrastructure. In fact, I think they had there was a news expose here in the Bay Area where they were going around to some of the power plants that are in the area, or transfer stations for power, and they were showing how there's like almost no security around these critical areas. There are now. That was a couple of years ago, but now let's take a look at some of the other items. People are hacking into TVs now. So people's TVs are getting hacked into, and different things happen. One example of this one was ransomware hacking your TV. And we think of ransomware hitting our computers, and then you have to pay a ransom, and then they give you a code that unlocks it so that you can get into it. Well, they can hack your devices as well. So if you have a device, and you think about, well, I'm a TV at home, who wants to go and buy a new TV if you don't have to, right? But not only that, how many people are now using TVs or monitors that are connected that are now in the workplace too? So that's one thing that can happen, ransomware. So keep track of that. Ransomware is one of the things, because as we go through this, I'm going to talk about different risks and different things that they can use. Life safety is one of them. We've kind of talked about that, but now ransomware is one of the things that can happen. What about spying on you, right? I love this story because it's one of my favorites to use, because is your kettle spying on you? Because they have these new kettles that can connect to the Wi-Fi. Well, they found out that these kettles were trying to get onto wireless networks and trying to exfiltrate data from there by sending that information back to a Chinese IP address. That's why we say, and the kettle was made in China, so we're trying to say that they're the ones behind it doing this. This is another example where you have an appliance that's in your house that's not, this isn't ransomware, but this is more like espionage. But I guess it's less like espionage, because if it's in your home, they're just going to hear the same conversation that Alexa does, right? Or maybe they're going to see some your family photos, or know that you're on Amazon buying whatever because they're on the network, and so they're watching all those things. So maybe that's not a big thing, but think about this. How many people have these kettles in their office buildings, in their employee kitchens or break areas, right? So you can see these things getting into other areas. It's not just the home consumer that needs to be concerned about these types of things. It's also the businesses, because they have them there. What about hacking cars? This hit big news, so if you didn't hear about it, you should have heard about it, because it was pretty big news. They hacked into a Jeep, and they were able to do things like control the radio, control what was displayed on the dash, affect what the speedometer said. They were able to do control the windshield wipers. They were able to kill the engine while he was driving down the road at 60 miles an hour. They can control the steering. I think they could only control the steering when it was in reverse, but they can control the locks, and they can disable the brakes. And they're saying Jeep's not the only one. They just found that in the Uconnect system that Chrysler uses, that there's a vulnerability. They could have picked any Chrysler product and probably had the same vulnerability, but they also did make a point to say, this is just one that we tested, because they were testers that were testing it. It wasn't hackers actually hacking into it, but a lot of other cars have the exact same type of systems in them, and the question is, how well can they be controlled? I think car manufacturers, after they saw this, have now stepped up their game, but we still need to be careful about that. And again, here's another issue. If you can disable the brakes, then that becomes a life safety issue again. And this is more of a consumer type thing, right? And I want to say, you see, and it's interesting, things like this that are in the news end up on TV shows. And I remember that show Elementary, a guy he acts like he's Sherlock Holmes, or he is Sherlock Holmes in the modern day, and he's in New York. And this one lady was working for a company, and her boss took her programming code that she used to control cars, and he was able to control it to make a car crash and make it look like an accident. So yeah, that is taking this information that we know about the fact that cars can be hacked, and then saying, okay, if a criminal had that access, what would he do with it? And then it shows you what could happen to it. Luckily, I don't think anyone has died from any of that kind of stuff, but it's possible, even if only in our imaginations. But criminals are kind of smart. If they really wanted to take advantage of these things, they may. So we want to watch out for those things. And again, we already talked about this. Amazon's already saying, hey, yes, Alexis does listen to conversation. Not only does Alexis do it, but our employees listen to it to kind of better it. And by the way, there's a way to get around this. If you have the Alexa, you can go into it, and it's under settings, and you just say, make Alexa better or something, turn that off. And I don't know exactly where it is. I'm sure you can find it on Google or Bing. But you go find out where that is, and then you can turn it off so that they won't pass your conversations on to live people to listen to. But think about this from a business perspective. What if that was in a business environment? What if it's in a conference room and you're talking about, trade secrets or any of those other types of things? And what if a hacker was able to hack into that device and then able to listen in on your conversations? It's one thing if Amazon's doing it. I get that. I get that why they're doing it. They're trying to make the product better. But imagine if somebody hacked into their device and now they also have access to everything you're talking about. And just think about those employees. I don't know what they do to vet those employees. But if you were Google and you have a new you're working on trying to improve your device that's like the Alexa, and you have the Alexa in the room and it's listening to you, and then they all of a sudden they get the conversation, they figure out what you're doing over at Google, right? So I mean, corporate espionage could be a big thing there too, between those two. There's been another good example. Something recently happened is there was CISA came out with an alert basically saying that they know that other critical infrastructure sectors, that the Russian government is actively targeting things like the energy and other critical infrastructure. So we know that other nation states are targeting our systems on the OT side of things. And in fact, one of the items that happened a couple of years ago was some Iranians were brought on charges here, and one of them had gained access to, and he was charged with, and I believe found guilty with it, but he was definitely charged with it, unauthorized access to the dam control system in New York State. So in other words, someone broke into the dam control system, again, another life safety issue, and it was Iranian. So you do have like the corporations doing, but you have nation states that are hacking into these items as well. Mostly critical infrastructure, but I don't put it past them to get into the IoT. You saw where we think China was the one behind the kettle, and so you just have different nation states, whether it's critical infrastructure or even consumer electronics, kind of breaking into those items. So if we go back a couple years to 2016, Mariah Botnet is a good example of where people used, or hackers, bad guys, used known passwords to break into devices. Then they used those devices to launch a denial of service attack against social media and other websites. So this example, what's interesting about this one is they were, I think it was mostly cameras, but they logged in and they knew that the default password for a lot of cameras does not get reset. And so they used those default passwords to then turn all of those IoT devices into a botnet, and then that botnet did a denial of service, taking down a good portion of the internet for at least it was a day or so. So if you look at this attack is interesting. They break into your system and they use that then as a means to attack other people. So they break into your IoT devices and it really doesn't harm you, but it's harming somebody else, right? So they use it, and at the end of this conversation, we'll talk about another way that criminals are using botnets other than just doing distributed denial of service attacks. But this became an issue, and this one really kind of brought it up front. But this Mariah Botnet has already been like morphed into other things, and there's newer versions, and the next one is going to be improved upon, logging into different types of devices in order to then connect and affect other, and then launch other attacks against it. So you're seeing that there's this huge use by hackers to use them also as a means to another attack. So they break into them and maybe use them to launch inside your network to other things, or use those things that they break into to attack other people. And there's no reason to think that hackers don't do both. That hackers don't break into those systems to get into your systems and then also use it to attack other systems with denial of service attacks or anything like that. And the funny thing about this is a lot of these credentials are published on the internet. So people will say, hey, here's a default password for this. You know, hackers go into this. There's websites out there you can go and look up default passwords. So if you have a router at home and it's an old one and you don't know how to get into it, you just go look up the default passwords. It's on the internet somewhere. Again, this is only part of the problem because the password is only the first step into breaking into things. If you change everybody's passwords, there's still other ways because other vulnerabilities to get into those devices. In fact, there was a scientist or researcher who said that through the lens of a camera, using flashing lights, you can hack into the camera. That's become an issue. Now, I don't know that that's been proved that that's possible. I don't know if it was just theory or if that was actually demonstrated to be actually possible. But you have to think about that's another way to get into a camera. So passwords and stuff are only part of the tip of the iceberg. We got to look at all the other different ways that people can hack into systems. We had a good example of another one in the news recently, and that is a Google employee hacked into their door control system so that they could easily get in and out. And I think that was last year. And so the interesting thing about that is it may have been somewhat harmless, but if someone can hack into their door system, that means they can circumvent the physical security controls, right? Here's a big one everybody likes to talk about, and that's the fish tank, right? The fish tank at a casino. Somebody broke into the control system of the fish tank, I think it was the thermostat, in their lobby. They had a really big, elaborate one, fish tank. And someone hacked into that, and then from there was able to hack into the rest of the network, right? So you don't even think about that. I know being in IT for 20 plus years, you know, something new comes along and someone says, oh, we need this, you know, this new conference control room thing, and everybody doesn't think about it. They think all this really cool stuff it's going to do, and they don't really think about, well, how is this going to incorporate with the rest of IT, and how are we going to protect it? We protect everything else. Why aren't we protecting that? It's connected to the network, right? And I think one of the problems that we run into in IT is we treat all those things as black boxes, because traditionally we don't have control. We can't put antivirus on it. Getting you know, the vendor to come out to patch something, we have a conference control room, you know, device. It allows us to control our conference room. And we cannot do the update to the firmware. We have to call a reseller to have him come out to update the firmware, right? So this is another one of the problems that we have with the vendors, is the vendors are putting us, the consumer, in a position where they don't want us touching the device, and they're not wanting to keep it up to date, right? So what do? We have to take mitigating we have to take mitigating controls to put in place to kind of do it. We'll talk about those on the next session. Other different types of things, they're hacking into everything. And I think one of the things that we've noticed, someone took, and again, this was an experiment. It wasn't someone actually doing this as an evil thing. The guy was doing it just to prove a point, and he was able to hack into a giant construction crane and was able to start making it move. Again, this is another life safety issue, but can you imagine that? The construction crane, someone just goes and hacks into them. People have taken over other types of things. It's just getting everywhere. Everywhere that there's something that's connected, people are hacking into it. And this becomes a problem for things like self-driving cars. If somebody can hack into a self-driving car, are the legislatures going to say, okay, we can start using self-driving cars? They're going to say no, because someone can hack into it. So we're not going to have to demonstrate that those self-driving cars, not only do you have to deal with all the stuff that that self-driving car is going to need, the technology necessary to get it to be able to drive by itself, but we're going to have to address the security before legislatures are even going to allow us to start driving on the roads on any normal basis. Everything's been testing now, but any normal basis, they're going to have to demonstrate that they have the ability to prevent attackers from taking over those devices and making the cars drive wherever they want them to drive. Now, this one's not a hack, but this one's a really interesting one. So this guy gets a garage door opener that basically you can control with your phone from home and whatever. So he gets this really expensive garage door controller, and he can use his phone to open it and do all these things. He got bad service, so he decides he's going to write a really bad Yelp review, and he's going to do all these other things and sue the company and all this stuff. And you know what the company did? They just turned it off. So his phone no longer can control his unit, and they basically turn off his unit. And so now he has a wall. He doesn't have a door anymore. It's really interesting because you have this relationship, especially when you have anything that you can control remotely. This shows you how much control someone can implement over that. Think about this. If you have a thermostat that you can control from home, and you have, let's say Nest or whoever it is, and that company, not that Nest is going to go out of business, but if that company goes out of business, how are you, the cloud service that connects your phone to that device, how is it going to work? It's not, unless they sell the business to somebody else does it. But then also, if you violate their terms of service or their terms of agreements, are they going to turn you off like these people did? So there's another type of thing. This is kind of like a loss or a denial of service type of thing, and it's not a, we don't think of it normally as a hack in this instance where it's a denial of service. It's a denial of service based upon the fact that the consumer and the manufacturer don't agree anymore, or the consumer is, complaining about the manufacturer. So that's an interesting story. Now, so the Olympics are coming up, and so the Japanese government says, hey, there's a lot of issues with these IoT devices, so we should just hack into them. So now we have governments not on a bad way. Well, I don't know if it's a bad or a good way. Typically we think when Russia's hacking into our power grid or something like that, we consider that bad. Japan's not trying to do it in a malicious way. They're trying to hack into it to prevent them from being taken over by other people. So they're trying to do it for good means, but they're still hacking into your devices. So, I mean, that's where the difference is there, I guess, if you want to call it good and bad. I think it's all bad, really shouldn't be hackable, right? That's what we want our devices to be, and that's what we need manufacturers to really start working on and get those consumer electronics to be that way. Someone had broken into dozens of security cameras in Japan, and because, again, what we think was default passwords weren't changed, and they were able to listen in, because a lot of cameras can listen in on conversations, and if those cameras are in work areas, they can listen in on the conversations in those areas as well. And what about this one? This one's an eerie one. But think about this. Some of these new vacuums that go around and they do vacuuming. This is the LG one, I think. And they had a researcher then found that there was a way that you could break into the way it logs into the system so that somebody can break into the cloud side of the equation and then get back to the device. So in this one, the device itself wasn't what was vulnerable. The vulnerability was logging into the web service, the cloud side of things, getting the username and password to get into the device that's at the home. Now these devices, what's interesting about these, and I kind of sounded like a really cool idea, if you have a vacuum cleaner that drives around and it also has a camera on it, then you basically also have a roaming sentry, right? That's driving around your house, and if there's motion, it can take a picture of it so that if your robot's in your house and someone breaks into your house, that maybe your robot will catch a picture of them, and you can use that in the future against them or turn over to law enforcement. Of course, that's a little creepy. You may be wearing your pajamas around the house or lack thereof, in which case your robot may be spying on you in a way that you may not be comfortable with. But that's another one of those issues, right? That's more of a privacy issue. But think about this. If they can hack into the cloud side of things, then they can get access into your house and see what's going on inside of your house, right? What about dolls, right? These toys that this Kayla doll that it has out there, somebody showed that you can get the Kayla doll that say different things, than it wasn't supposed to. It caused so much concern that the FBI is saying, hey, you need to watch out for this, and the German government and a bunch of other EU states said, we're banning it outright because it could be used for espionage purposes. So that's another good example of where you don't think about it. It's a toy. You've heard of stories, I know they've been around for a long time, about people hacking into baby monitor systems. Those are another types of things that it's a little creepy if you think about it. Someone's watching your kid sleep. I don't know what they're going to do with it if they just watch a kid sleep, but there's other types of things. Just the idea that they can do it does make you feel like your privacy's been invaded. And I like this one. It says your heater is now a part of a botnet, and your camera is going to join in, right? So I saw this on a blog, and the link's there if you want to go check it out. But that's true, right? It's the devices that in your house can now be used in a botnet. They can use it to attack other devices. So watching out for that. Another example one was Vending Machines, a law firm that gave employees badges. They could swipe their card so they didn't have to pay for it. The vending machine company was found selling that information to a marketing firm because the badges had more information about the employee on it than just authentication information. And so this one, I don't want to say it's harmless, but it's not like the hacker, it was like a business and they were just selling marketing information. It's the same thing that, you know, Google and Facebook and everybody else are getting in trouble for, and that is that they're selling your information in ways that you didn't know that they were going to sell it, and you may not be happy about the way they're selling it. But this one seemed to be a little bit more covert, right? And so this one was probably more than just a violation of privacy. Department of Homeland Security shows that you can hack into a Boeing 757. That's not a good thing, right? And you can see where electronics in airplanes can cause airplanes to crash right now with the downed planes that we have because of the Ethiopian crash and the other crash. So those, because of the faulty electronic systems, are the IoT devices. Now think about this. What if somebody hacked into those devices? Right, so now this is another life safety issue. And I hope that you're getting, as I've been talking about this all day, that life safety is a concern with security. It's not just about them hacking us or invasion of privacy, but it's also life safety is a serious issue. And I hope that people don't have to die before governments start saying, okay, we need to make sure that manufacturers manufacture security into their devices. Let's hope it doesn't happen like that. Here's another good example. So you have that botnet. Say you're a hacker and you get this botnet of all these IoT devices out there. What are some ways that you can make some money with it? Well, you can go out and do denial of service as a service, right? So you can tell other people, hey, if you want to bring down this other company, you just pay us, and then we'll attack them and we'll have a denial of service. And we'll use our bot network to do that. That's a bunch of IoT devices around the world. Well, you can still make more money other ways. You can actually use those devices to log in, set up fake Instagram accounts, and then sell likes as a marketing firm to people that want to get more likes. So they're turning it into a way of setting up fake accounts so that you can just get more likes because you pay for it and you get more likes. And it's just a bunch of bots. It's not a real audience. So they're defrauding the people that are getting the marketing service by telling them, hey, we're going to help you get more likes and grow your brand or whatever it is. And I can imagine a lot of businesses are like, hey, I got a lot of likes, but I'm not getting any sales. Well, that's because IoT devices don't buy anything, right? So yet, maybe in the future, who knows? So anyways, this is another example of that. They're selling likes by using a bot network that is a bunch of hacked IoT devices. So that's just another example of that. Interesting thing, like Tesla has said for a long time that their cars are secure, but when the hurricane came, one of the things that came out was that they needed to extend the range of the cars, and an update was required for that, and Tesla said, don't worry about it, we'll get them updated. So the question is, how are they getting updated? And the question is there any security? Now, we would call this security by obscurity. We don't know how their updates work in this type of situation. So we don't know if there's any weakness there. So that doesn't mean it's secure, because it just means somebody, like a bad guy, finds out about it, and then nobody knows that there's a weakness and the bad guy has it. So typically, security by obscurity is not something that we in the security industry think is a great thing. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's not. There's a better way to let other people know how things happen so that we know that they're secure. So a lot of speculation on how this happened. Was it from car to car that the one car would update and then it would update other cars nearby through cell phone towers, all these other types of things. So people were concerned about that, not knowing who could possibly have control over items within their cars. Biometric devices, another good one. Hackers actually stole people's fingerprints and then actually upload their own fingerprints so they can gain access, physical access to a warehouse. So that's another interesting way of doing it. Medical IoT, medical devices have always been kind of one of those things where they've been a target in the past, and there's been a lot of noise around that in some of the UK's systems when a bunch of medical devices were hit with malware. So we're seeing that medical devices are one of those things. And again, obviously that can be a life safety issue. If the x-ray stops working, you think, well, no one's going to die from that. But if the heart monitor, goes on the fritz, then maybe somebody could die from that. Well, but what if you need to do an X-ray on somebody that needs to have surgery right away? So there's still a life safety issue with that and medical IoT. Lockers at an amusement park. Darktrace has found a number of these things that people didn't even know were there. And there's a few of them. Lockers at an amusement park. Hackers were able to exfiltrate data out of those. They also found equipment on assembly line being broken into and then using that as a lateral movement within an organization. They found that a parking lot kiosk was compromised, and I think the kiosk was actually going to a porn site. Don't know why. Don't know what the hackers had in mind there, but that was another one of those things. So what's all the bad stuff that can happen? You can have things like click fraud, which is kind of what we talked about with the having the IoT device pretend to like things. That's what click fraud is. We can have them set up a botnet. We can use IoT devices, or hackers can, for data theft and espionage. They can use them, which I haven't talked about up until this point. They can use it for cryptocurrency mining. They'll break into your systems and then have those systems mined for bitcoins and things like that. They can use it for a ransom. They can use it to access other devices. They can make the device fail, which could potentially cause life safety issues. If it was a car or a crane or a safety device or an airplane, device failure could have the implication of that. We can have the invasion of privacy. Data theft and espionage maybe is a little bit similar to that, but just invasion of privacy, I'm thinking more of a, like Alexa listening to you, which is not the end of the world, but you probably didn't want her listening to your conversation, or employees of Amazon listening to the fight you had with your spouse. Destruction, they can make devices destroy themselves, like in the centrifuges in Iran with Stuxnet. You can have a loss of service, denial of service, or just bring the service down, or you can have a loss of life. So these are all the bad things that can happen when IoT is not secure. So there's a lot of things that can happen here that we need to address, and we need to figure out how we're going to address those things going forward. Just as an example, this Shodan ICS Radar is really focusing on industrial control systems. They're not even talking about all the other IoT items out there, but it's just connecting in with default passwords and finding devices. And there's millions of devices on the internet that are connected that they can have access to. And they actually even have honeypots set up, which is interesting. We can talk about that next time. And this just was in the news today. So, and I thought it was funny because now, how are you going to solve this problem with IoT? You just arrest it, right? Just get rid of it. The story is actually funny. So somebody was, I think, house sitting for somebody else, and they heard some noise in the bathroom, and they thought there was an intruder in the bathroom. So they called the police, and the police came, and they're, yelling at somebody to come out of the bathroom, and they open the door, and it's a Roomba driving around and vacuuming. So the police turned it into a joke, and they said, most wanted, we captured it. And this has nothing to do with security. That was just funny. But you can't just arrest IoT. But it's going to be here with us, and so we need to protect it. And things like those, like the most simple thing that everybody says, so we'll talk about this next week, but it'll give you something to go home with today, and that is you need to change the default passwords on everything. If you remember Spaceballs, a friend of mine sent me an email yesterday, and it said, hey, this kind of reminds me of Spaceballs, when the default password for the Shield was 12345, and the Emperor guy comes in and says, oh, that's the password on my luggage. So obviously, if we can address maybe just the password idea, I think that's a good thing, but I think that we have to go beyond that. It's a good first step, but it's not in and of itself security, and so we need to kind of move a little bit forward. So next session, we're going to talk about what the core issues are, because there's a lot more to, especially like OT and IoT, things like the fact that you bought it and you expect to use it for 10 years, but the manufacturer wants you to update new hardware every 3 years. How do you deal with that? What are some strategies you can deal with it? What are some of the legislations that we're starting to see? What are the OT standards that are out there? And then what IoT standards, if any, which there kind of isn't, because we're really talking OT more of the industrial control systems and IoT more of the consumer electronics side of things. And the standards that exist are great for OT, kind of point them in the right direction, but we still don't have the same type of thing in IoT. Although the UK did come out with a code of practice that is trying to address that. And I know NIST has a work group working on IoT now, so there is some moving forward for that. So we'll give you some resources as well as talking about some of those standards and just some common sense stuff that you can do to kind of address those issues. So the takeaway from this session, I hope, is mind what you learned, save you a can. Remember that you can't just put plywood over a hole and protect the Death Star, like they tried in Robot Chicken. What you need to do, we have to really address the underlying issue. And we have to have security at the design part of all electronics, all connected devices. And security needs to be the first consideration so that we can continue to trust these devices. Because the bad thing about this is there's a lot of really cool innovation out there around this. But if we don't have it secure, people won't trust it. And if they don't trust it, it won't progress, or it'll progress slower. I think like self-driving cars are going to progress really slow because of trust issues. And it's going to take a long time before you really see it fully implemented. If we could trust it sooner, it would probably be implemented sooner. So those are things we need to take away. So that's the carrot for all those corporations that want to make IoT devices. Make them secure up front. And then you foster trust with consumers, and then consumers will rely upon it more, and then you can innovate more. So that being said, go out there and try and make the world cyber safe any way you can. Remember that this webinar is suitable for continuing education under self-recording if you need it, wherever your body is. Stop, Think, Connect is a great place to go to give you some kind of updates on some of this, especially on the consumer side of things, but there's some good information for small and medium businesses as well. And remember, if you want to see the updated ones, you can, part 2 is already posted on our channel in Bright Talk, so you can go there and sign up for it. You can also contact us on our blog if you have any questions. Please rate the sessions if you get a chance. It really helps. And if you have any questions or comments, just contact us. And look out for upcoming webinars. Thank you very much for your time.